Hi, I'm Shelley Wood and this is my tiny sewing room where I make doll clothes sewing videos. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pretty little pinafore style dress for the little 7-inch Lottie dolls. And it will also fit similar sized dolls. But before we begin this sewing project, please go to my website, shelleywood.com, to download and print this free PDF sewing pattern. Use the pattern to cut out all the pieces shown here. Lay one bodice front on top of another, keeping right sides together so the pretty side touches the pretty side. Stitch around the armhole areas and the neckline. Clip your seams. Now I'm using a pair of Fisker's mini stitchers scissors, the little 5-inch scissors. And I highly recommend these if you're doing tiny doll clothes. There's a link to them in the description below. Invert the bodice front. I use a chopstick to help me with this, like you use for Chinese food. It really helps if you give it a little twist to try and get those straps inverted. Now your bodice front should look like this. Press your seams. Lay one bodice back on top of another, again keeping your right sides together. Sew around the armhole area, the neck, and the back closure area, like you see in this image. Follow these directions for both of your bodice backs, so you end up with 2. Clip your seams. Invert. Again, that's what you see me doing here. And like I said, you want to give your chopstick a little twist, very gently, so that you don't rip through the seam, but you just manage to get that little strap area, the shoulder strap, to come through, gently. You want to go gently. I realize it's fast motion, but I did this very slowly and very gently with the tip of my chopstick. Press your backs, and you should now have 2 backs that look like this. Lay one back on top of the bodice front. Stitch across the shoulder area. Do the same with the other back piece. Open the bodice up like this, and press the shoulder seams to flatten them. Bring together the sides like this. Open each side and stitch them together. Now that's tricky, so let me show you what I mean. So you want to open up where we haven't sewn on the side seam on both the front and bodice back. And then you just lay them overlapping like this before you stitch. Now I'm using a back stitch for this. If you need help with the back stitch, I do have a tutorial for that. You can just look in the description area on this YouTube video. Clip both sides of the midpoint of this seam that you just created, and that's what I'm doing here with my little Fisker stitchers. Now do the same for the other side seam area. Okay, so once again you want to bring those sides together. I know this is kind of tricky, but hopefully the more 3-dimensional video helps you understand what we're doing here. Okay, stitch and clip this seam like you did the other one. And there I am clipping my seam very carefully. Now it'll open up like I showed you. Hem the long side of the skirt by folding once and then a second time. So here's my skirt, and I use the long side of the skirt. I fold once, and then I fold a second time. And now I'm going to hem. You can whip stitch to hem along this bottom edge, or you can just use your sewing machine, which is, as you can see, exactly what I did. Gather the waist of the skirt, leaving a slight overhang of ungathered fabric about 2 centimeters long, which is about 3/4 of an inch long, on each side of the skirt's waist. Do not tie off your gathered thread. Instead, leave the gathered thread hanging there loosely while you measure the gathers to match the bottom part of the bodice. Now, it's a good idea to look ahead at this. Don't include the overhanging sides when you're measuring. And here's what I mean. So here's my gather thread, and I'm leaving that free to use as I measure against the bodice. All right, so I pick up my bodice, and I try to connect the bodice close to the gathers so that there's still some overhang of skirt fabric. And then I start pulling on my gather thread so that I'm kind of matching the bodice with the gathered area. Once you're sure it will fit, tie off your gathers. All right, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just doing a quick knot with my needle and thread, and then I even out my gathers. Pin the bodice's outer fabric to the skirt all along the gathered area. You'll need to have that overhanging area still extending out beyond the bodice on both sides. Okay, just to make sure you know what I mean, I open up this bodice just like that, and I'm only going to pin to the front, or in other words, the outer fabric of the bodice. I'm not pinning to the lining at all, okay? So I'm making sure that overhanging skirt is still outside of the range of the bodice. And there are my pins. So I did this part in, sort of quick motion so that you don't have to wait for me to finish pinning. But make sure your gathers are real even before you start pinning. You want to make sure that the skirt looks even in front and sides and back. Stitch the skirt to the bodice's outer fabric only, and again I recommend a back stitch for this. It's very sturdy. Note I'm sewing the skirt to the outer bodice while the lining is still detached from the skirt. I'm trying to show lots of pictures so you get a feel for that. When you lift the bodice up like this, the extended sides of the skirt are going to curl down. You're going to do a double fold for each side of the skirt and whip stitch to form a nice back closure there. Okay, tricky to understand, so I'm going to show you again in video format. So I've got my skirt attached to just the front part of the bodice, right? And what I do is I lift up, and that curls this down, and then I'm going to fold once, fold a second time, and then here's how that back closure is going to look after I whip stitch it. Do this for both sides of the skirt. Fold the bodice lining inside toward the gathers, keeping the raw edges of the fabric inside the bodice, and whip stitch along the bottom of the bodice to seal the gathers inside the bodice. Again, tricky to understand, so here's what I mean. So we've finished the side seams, and we have this hanging lining that's waiting to be sewn. We're going to fold that lining in toward the gathers, and then when you tip it up, okay, so there it is folded. When you tip it up like that, then you're going to seal the gathers inside the pinafore bodice. This is how it will look when you start stitching. And again, I'm using a whip stitch for this. Now your dress will look like this. Here's how it looks from the outside. Fold it in half with your right sides together. Okay, so here it is, and I fold it in half, and I bring those two skirt raw edges together. Sew from the hem to the back closure that you created earlier. Here's a closer look at that stitch. Add a couple of snaps in the back, and now you're ready to try it on a doll. Lottie looks so cute in this little pinafore. Now, for more free printable PDF sewing patterns for making doll clothes that will fit dolls of many shapes and all different sizes, please remember to visit my website, shelleywood.com. Hey, did you know that you could design your own doll pants patterns from scratch with just a limited amount of sewing knowledge? Pattern design is made simple by connecting your doll's measurements with a template I give you during my course. I'm Shelley Wood, the doll clothing designer. I own Shelley Wood LLC and the website shelleywood.com. In my Creative Spark online learning course on doll pants design, I'll teach you the basic fundamentals of pattern design, like how do seam allowances work, before we move on to work on designing our own leggings, jeans, fly front pants, and even overalls. So please join me. I would love to see you on the Creative Spark online learning platform. Come see what we offer. Again, I'm Shelley Wood, one of the instructors.